Hi, friends. Welcome back. We have a great guest today. Dr. Kevin Shelby teaches in the professional counseling program at Harding University here on our Memphis campus. And he has a background in ministry and a passion for ministry. And I've asked him to speak with us today as a counselor about how we as ministers can work with our congregations and bless our churches as we go through this traumatic time as a fellowship, as a body, and as individuals. So welcome, Dr. Shelby.
Thanks for having me, Matt. It's good to be here.
Thanks. So Kevin, let's start with the question about grief. What are we experiencing here with this situation?
Yeah, I think that's a really good place to start because um, it is the very thing that we all are experiencing right now. We have experienced lots of losses in our daily life, and Harvard actually put out a study recently that said that that thing that you're feeling, it's called grief. And so
Mm.
most people don't know what they're feeling right now. Feel unstable, and we don't know what the future holds. We don't know, when we're going to get back to our normal lives, and if it'll ever go back to being the way that it used to be. And there are a lot of losses that we've experienced in the midst of that. um,
Mhm.
we've lost the ability to go to the movie theater, and our seniors have lost their graduation. As a body, we've lost our ability to gather together and to see each other and to touch each other, and not have a screen between us.
Mm.
And so that change that happened overnight sent us into loss upon loss.
Mm.
I mean, even people, you look at unemployment. People have lost their jobs. And I think one of the biggest things is that we're all anticipating losing people that we love and know as a result of this virus.
Mhm.
And that's another unsettling part of this, is we just don't know who it's going to affect. um, and I think we're kind of all just like bracing for something that we can't really prepare for.
That's pretty scary when you say we're bracing for something we can't really prepare for. Um, would you say that most of us are skilled at working with our feelings in the best of times?
Absolutely not. I mean, I've been doing this work for about 15 years, and this is my profession, and it's hard for me to do that, and so
Mm.
so many are unprepared emotionally for this moment right here. Alcohol sales are through the roof. They've
Mm.
increased by 90%. Depression and anxiety has increased
Mhm.
significantly. We will probably see suicide increase when the numbers come out in the midst of this pandemic. It, yeah, I mean, it's scary because we don't know how to prepare for this emotionally.
Mhm.
um, and so being ill-equipped is a difficult place to find ourselves.
Mhm.
And I think that's where churches can step in and have play a vital role in helping people begin to prepare for what we're all getting ready to experience.
Mm. What's the significance of the fact that we are all experiencing this? Normally, if you're a minister and there's a death in your congregation, you are grieving, but you're not a family member. And so you're able to some degree, um, step out a little bit and minister to the people in need. As ministers, we're not exempt from the stress, from the grief, from the loss. We're all experiencing this. How, as ministers, do we step in that kind of a situation?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to name what we're feeling, and to not resist those emotions.
Mm. Mhm.
I think ministers experience burnout and people in general experience being overwhelmed when they try to push their emotions away instead of
Mhm.
letting them, you know, naming it and letting them feel what it is that they're experiencing. And so I think that's the first step, is being able to say, okay, I am overwhelmed right now and dealing with grief and loss, and I need to talk to somebody about that. And so I think it's important for them to reach out and to not have to be the superhero all the time,
Mhm.
and to be able to reach out to somebody that they trust, or a counselor, and actually process what they're going through.
Mhm.
um Ministers are trying to figure out what they're supposed to be doing with themselves right now. I mean, we've got online church, and that's taking up, some time, but not every minister is doing an online church, and so a lot of their time is probably spent at home, maybe checking in on people, but not, I mean, it's like everything that they were accustomed to doing, going to the office and preparing for sermons and all of that has been taken away. And
Mhm.
so the normal things that we rely on to give us consistency is now gone, and I think ministers in particular are trying to figure out, what do I do with myself right in
Mhm.
the midst of experiencing all this loss and grief. And now I have to prepare for all of my all the people in my congregation to be experiencing this grief, and to help walk through that and shepherd through that. And that's a really tough place to be, when you've lost all normalcy, and then
Mhm.
you've got to be the one leading people through these difficult times.
Wow. Are there some specific things you might recommend for ministers to be doing with their congregation at this point? Maybe some specific teaching and preaching points, or how can we as ministers work with our congregations to prepare them and shepherd them through the grief process?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that there's some definite things that can be done. One would be just talking to people, making contact with people, and talking to them about, um, uh, also naming what it is that they're experiencing, and try to help draw out what it is that people are facing right now, and
Mhm.
try to provide wisdom and guidance, but to help them put words to what they're feeling. I think also spending some time in scripture, and being able to point people towards, how did Jesus deal with grief and loss? What was it that he did, and how can we draw from his example to say, okay, this is how we are to walk through this, and to help, give people wisdom in that way.
Mhm.
I think also encouraging people to make amends with those who are, that are in their life. Um, I think this could serve as a wake up call to say, hey, any one of us could get sick and die from this. And
Mhm.
so, let's not waste time, um, just carrying bitterness and frustration towards one another. Let's
Mhm.
use this as an opportunity to bridge the broken relationships in our lives, so that we don't end up with any regrets should we lose somebody too soon.
Boy, this is really helpful. Um, as we think about how we view one another in these times, um, any any thoughts about compassion? Any thoughts about? I know in a previous conversation we had talked about how some of us are viewing others as a threat, whereas we're also trying to protect others by isolating ourselves. How does this play on our relationships?
Yeah, I went to the grocery store the other day, and I had my mask on that my wife made for me. We'd cut up filters and put them in the slot, and I've got my hand sanitizer and my gloves, and I feel like I'm ready to go to battle, like I'm putting on, uh, I'm putting on all my armor. And
Mhm.
I'm in the grocery store, and this guy is walking down the aisle, and he passes me. He's like 2 feet away from me, and I look at him, and I'm like, in my head, I think, "What's wrong with you, buddy? Like, why are you getting so close to me?" And
Mhm.
it sort of clicked with me as I walked out of the grocery store that like everybody in that store felt like a threat to me. And not only people in the store, but people riding their bikes, walking down the street, even our own families, if they haven't
Mm.
been quarantining with us, you know they're they have to stay away. And so I think that it sort of clicked with me that we are all living in this new reality where every single person around us is a threat.
Mm.
And uh and I think that that has to be impacting us you know on an emotional level in ways that we can't even put words to yet. And
Mm.
so but I here's the reality. Here's what I came to. It's that people are not the threat.
Mhm.
The virus is the threat. And I think that's something that churches need to help people remember, because when all of this dies down, because it will die down eventually,
Mhm.
when all of this starts to subside and we do come back together, we're going to have to work through that emotional reaction that we have towards the people around us to bridge back the gap that has been created as a result of the virus so that people don't feel like a threat anymore. And I,
Mhm.
I, I think that we will continue to experience that until we do work to create space for us to remind ourselves people are not the threat. And
Mm.
I think we can start doing that now. That we can remind ourselves if somebody passes too closely, if somebody drops something off at our house, um, when we see our family members, we just have to like say those words. They are not a threat to me. It's the virus
Mm.
that's a threat. And reminding ourselves of that now, I think will help us when we do come back together and we get to celebrate together
Mhm.
that we don't have to have a screen between us anymore. That
Wow.
that needs to be a sweet and beautiful moment for us, not one where
Mhm.
we're feeling like, oh, can we, should we get too close? It needs to be a
Mhm.
time of celebration.
Wow. This conversation has also opened up 20,000 other questions for me that I will not throw at you at this particular point. But I am, you were talking about when we come back together. Of course, at that point, we need to be compassionate about, is this person open to a handshake or a hug? Being wise about those things.
That's true.
Uh, could you comment maybe a little bit on the long-term effects of grief and trauma? Because it's not like when we come back together, um, the effects of what we've been experiencing, the stress and angst, it's not like those effects go away, is it?
No, and that's the thing is both grief and trauma, they're not just emotional reactions that we have control over. They actually become biological in nature.
Mm.
And so we have to be intentional with how we manage that biological response that we're going to have as a result of this trauma that we've experienced. So like
Mhm.
and that's the thing is, I I think going back to the point I made earlier about people being a threat, that's what trauma does to people. When you experience a traumatic event, it creates a reaction biologically, uh, and it makes everything feel like a threat to you,
Mm.
especially things that remind you of that event. And so, I mean, trauma is kind of a buzzword that gets thrown around a lot in mental health, but I would say that, on a large scale, we are all going to have somewhat of a traumatic response
Mhm.
to all of this. So we need to be going to therapy. People need to take advantage of counseling. We need to be talking about it with our family members and noticing when we're experiencing that reaction internally,
Mhm.
and we are realizing that, man, I this has impacted me in a much bigger way than I expected. um, Being able to talk to somebody about that is huge. And so there are specific things that we can do, um, in terms of just saying, okay, I have this traumatic response internally to something that feels like a threat. um, Once I realize that, it's important for me to not just let it continue.
Mhm.
It's important for me to do something with it. So
Because our
I'm not.
response to a threat is to um, respond aggressively or run away.
Absolutely. So we have to practice compassion. We have to practice,
Mhm.
settling ourselves,
Mhm.
breathing deeply, and just, saying, okay, the person across from me is not a threat. These people around me are not a threat. And remind ourselves to step towards them if they want us to step towards them in a way that is compassionate and loving,
Mhm.
and endearing, not in a way that says stay away from me. Especially when it comes to reconnecting with the body.
Well, this is really good, Kevin. I really appreciate your being here. I didn't prep you for this question, so it's okay if you don't have an answer. But are there a couple of resources that you might recommend for ministers to look at, either books, articles, websites that might help us as we minister in the midst of our own grief, but ministering to people in grief?
Yeah, there's a book. It's kind of the gold standard for grief. It's called the Grief Handbook, and
Hmm.
you can find that on Amazon. Um,
I'll put a I'll put a link in here.
okay, and also, I think that the idea of connection and intimacy are so important. When we're thinking about, um, when we get to the end of this.
Hmm.
And I've done some podcasts and things like that on intimacy and connection. And I'd encourage them to go to my website, renewmystory.com, and check out the podcasts that are there. Um,
I'm sorry, I did not know about that. I will definitely include a link to that.
yeah, absolutely. And I think there are a number of, good articles that we could post for people too. Um,
Okay.
so yeah, I can get those to you as well.
That would be great. That way people can continue thinking and working through this, and be ready to continue growing through it.
Absolutely.
I keep hearing people say these are unprecedented times. Obviously, there have been plagues and influenzas before, but in our lifetime, it is something new that none of us really have expertise in dealing with. And so I'm grateful, Kevin, that you're willing to share your expertise and help us to continue to equip ministers and other church leaders to serve their congregations and help their congregations in these difficult times.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And I just would say to everybody out there, um, he's got this. The Lord has this, and he
Mm,
knows he knows the way forward better than we do. And so, um, I'm thankful that we get to, walk that journey together as the
mm,
Lord's people. And I think we're going to see an increase in people's interest in church and faith.
mm.
And I think that's another place where we should be ready to respond. So I'm thankful to have a chance to help support that and to help churches grow.
Amen. Thanks a bunch, Kevin. God bless you.
Thank you. You too.